Hi there, and welcome to another interview for What Happens Next. I'm really excited about this one because I'm on I'm on more level ground. I was saying to Dennis before we started recording in earnest, I interviewed somebody on the subject of sleep last week, and I learnt a lot, but I don't add any value in terms of input because I'm still learning how to sleep a bit better myself. However, Dennis and I are going to be talking about the relationship we have with money and how we can manage money as a part of our lives in a bit of a better way. And I'm sure that during our conversation, we're going to be sharing some insights. Dennis, in particular, is going to be sharing insights on how we can engage with our money better, particularly at the point of life where we're thinking about making change. But before I do that, I need to ask a favour. We're on a bit of a mission with What Happens Next to help people like you manage that transition either into retirement or into whatever you choose to do next in your life in a bit of a better way. Now, how are we doing that? My experience is that often a lot of the interviews you see are about either stopping work and going into retirement and stopping work entirely. We don't believe that's always the most appropriate route to take. And what we'd love to have on What Happens Next is just really nuanced conversations about the options you've got if you're in your 50s and 60s and thinking about the next stage of your life. So 2 things you can really do to help us continue to do that. Number 1 is like this video if you get some value out of it. And number 2 is subscribe to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. The links to do all of that will be below. And without further ado, let's move on to the interview. Dennis, thank you today for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Chris. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with such an amazing guest list that you've had in the past. I had a little check out of all the wonderful people that you've had. So yeah, very much looking forward to this conversation. And if you want to talk about retirement and stuff like that, then we can certainly explore the stories that we tell ourselves around retirement and how we can create positive ones.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we'll explore a lot into this. How much of our perspective on the world, both financially and otherwise, is about the stories we tell ourselves, right? And I'm really excited about exploring a little bit about that. And you're right, we've been incredibly fortunate to have some amazing guests on What Happens Next. And I know that every time we interview somebody who's brilliant, I get to learn as well. So it's a for me. Without further ado, can you just tell us a bit about? I know who you are, and I'm a fan of what you do. But tell our audience a little bit about you.
Sure, thank you, Chris. So my name is Dennis Archalakis. I'm a certified money coach. I am a money coach trainer. I help people to understand their patterns, behaviors, and emotions around money. But before that, I spent 30 years in financial services. I started in the mid-'80s, if you can believe that. And so I spent 30 years in wealth management and also other kind of, platforms around kind of helping people with money. My main background is creating wealth management platforms, product platforms. So I didn't have a huge amount of time in front of clients, but essentially I spent 30 years and I thought I knew a lot about money. And I guess I kind of did, but I had this realization while listening to a financial planner on a podcast talk about the origins of our patterns and behaviors and emotions. I realized that actually I didn't really know very much about money in myself. I knew how money worked in the real world and how it moved around, but in terms of kind of myself, not very much. And I realized at that point that I had inherited my father's money anxiety, along with a lot of his other anxieties and scarcity issues. And I've been dragging those around for the whole of my life. So this was 2018. It gave me an insight into who I was, why I behaved and how I behaved. And that was my turning point to become a money coach, to train as a money coach, and to understand money in myself. And so I've spent the last, whatever that is, 7 or 8 years, exploring my relationship with money, understanding it, healing from some of the earlier wounds from childhood, and helping other people do the same thing. And I think in terms of kind of where you point that, if you think about money coaching, it's really a framework for understanding patterns, behaviors, and emotions around money. Yes, I do coach people. Yes, I do train coaches, but fundamentally, it's really about understanding behavior, and then you can move forward. And so in the financial space, I help planners and advisors understand client money behavior, because I think that's, massively important. So if you kind of ask me, why is that different from advice or planning? Well, first of all, I don't go near any regulated stuff. But really it's about the patterns, behaviors, and emotions that we have around money that drive our behavior.
I'm really curious about how good a job we do in the UK in particular, but in financial services worldwide, about having better conversations around money. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, well, there's an area. So I think we can get a lot better at it. So when you look at the planning process, it's linear, it's logical, it's transparent, it's numbers based. And when you look at the money decision process, it's the opposite of all of those. And that's an area I'm really looking forward to exploring with you. So the question then is, I think there's two things. One is, if this is how we make decisions around money, and this is how the planning process treats it, am I going to drag my client towards my process, or am I going to move towards the client and understand a bit more about their process? So if you ask yourself the question, or as I do, is like, well, do you help clients make financial decisions? The answer is almost invariably, yes, we do. So, okay, fine, great, brilliant. How do you know how your client makes their financial decisions? What do you know about them that helps you understand how they make those decisions so that you can help them make those decisions? What do you know about money behavior in general, but more particularly, how does the person in front of you make their decisions? How does the person sitting next to them make their decisions? And what happens when they're not aligned, which is another area to explore. So in terms of conversations, it is all about conversations, because fundamentally your advice is only as good as the conversation you can have with that person.
Sure 100%. I think it's interesting, because I'm having a couple of conversations at the minute about where the line is, right? So effectively, as advisors, I agree with you, by the way. As advisors, I think we've got an obligation to have personal conversations that allow people to live the lives they want with the money they've got. I've had conversations over the past week or so with both big platform and pension providers and other advisors who say there's a bit of a fear about crossing the line towards life coaching, towards elements where the area of expertise, some people might feel that they've got no interest in crossing that line. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Where is that line?
So that line is personal, because it's based on your own fears. So when I talk to people about money conversations and open money conversations with clients, what tends to come up is where they personally hit the discomfort, and they go, "Oh no, I couldn't do that." My clients will look, and I had an advisor say, I couldn't do any of this. My clients will look at me and go, "Have you been on a course?" So actually the answer is yes, I've been on a fantastic course, and it's explained to me a lot about money behavior. I'd love to explore that with you if you're open for it. So I think the main thing here is that having an understanding of money behavior, money coaching as a framework for understanding behavior, doesn't mean you need to coach clients. Coaching is a separate activity. But if you think about it as a toolbox, a set of a set of understandings around how you can explore topics with clients, how you can help them to feel safe. So let's look at coaching and say, okay, what do I fundamentally do as a coach? I create a safe space, and I hold a safe space for people to talk about things that are really difficult for them. So if I say to you, Chris, as a planner, what do you do? Is it any different from that?
Yeah, a lot of it's similar, isn't it?
It's exactly the same thing. You create a safe space for your clients to talk about things that they may find really difficult. So therefore, the protocols or whatever, the tools, the understanding that I have, that I use in, through conversation with the client. I mean, we're kind of doing it now. It's exactly the same thing that you would do with a client.
Yeah.
Understand where they are, meet them where they are, use the language that they understand. So in some senses, do you remember the golden rule? Treat people the way that you want to be treated yourself. And have you come across Stephen Covey's platinum rule?
Yeah, we talked about it. So I'd love for you to share it with our audience too.
Yeah, so Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Effective People has his platinum rule, which is you don't treat people the way that you want to be treated yourself. You treat people the way that they want to be treated.
Yeah. It's as you said earlier, it's going on to somebody else's map of the world as opposed to imposing your own on them.
Right.
Now,
your own in two senses, the word your own as like, this is how I, Chris, see the world, and what's a good idea to do with your money and not a good idea to do with your money. And then there's the framework that the financial services industry creates as to how you see the world. Yeah. So and then that is now it's filtered through my own view. So if you apply the platinum rule to client conversations, it's talking to clients about their money in a way that they want and they can connect with, in the way that they understand it, not necessarily the way the industry presents it, and not necessarily the way I present it with my own biases.
Yeah, no, completely get that. Now, the interesting thing is and as an advisor, that's really, really useful. But what I'm interested in exploring on this interview, particularly because most people watching this won't be advisors, is helping people understand how to get a better relationship with money.
Yeah.
So talk to me about, if you're watching this, you're at home, you're going, I've never really thought about my relationship with money. What do I need to do? What's the first practical step people can take?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm going to précis that by saying, if you'd asked me that question 7 or 8 years ago, I'd have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you go, what the hell is he talking about relationship with money? I just need more of it. That's obvious, right? That would have been my answer before I really understood it. So we need to define what we mean by relationship with money. I think would be the place to start with this, Chris. So what is your relationship with money? Your relationship with money is a set of beliefs that you have about what you can do or be or have with money, right?
Yeah.
It's based up, the model that I use has kind of 3 parts to it. One of them is how do I feel about myself? The second part is how do I feel about money? And the third part is how do I feel about money and myself, right? There's three separate bits to it. The thing that's important to understand here is that how you feel about yourself is the cornerstone of your relationship with anything and anybody.
Yeah.
So if we put this into the money space, then people who are good with their finances, I feel good about myself, I'm competent, I have confidence in my knowledge and decision-making processes, I have a level of control over my future, I believe I have, self-efficacy, I take ownership of my outcomes. My self-worth does not depend on my net worth or my possessions. I am enough. I am enough in myself. In fact, you always have been enough in yourself. The world conspires to tell you that you're not, but I'm here to say that you are and you always were. Now, when I feel good about money, then money is a tool to achieve well-being. It's not the work of the devil. It's not the root of all evil. The only thing that matters, or something we don't talk about. It's not this unknown or confusing thing that I don't understand. Now, it's important to be good with money now more so than ever. Like 2,000 years ago, it didn't really matter, but now it does. But that doesn't mean that money is the most important thing in the world. And the third part, when I feel good about money in myself, then I understand how money works. And if I don't, I'm okay with finding out. Money or thinking about money doesn't make me feel uncomfortable, anxious, ashamed, inadequate, guilty. I am comfortable having open money conversations. I am comfortable asking for what I'm worth. I'm comfortable engaging with the financial system. If I feel that money is evil, or thinking about it or talking about it's wrong, then I'm not going to engage with it. If I feel that I'm incompetent, then I don't want to look or feel stupid, so I'm not going to engage with it. If I'm trapped in guilt or shame or regret, I won't engage with my finances or anything that triggers my discomfort around money and myself. So you need all three to have a healthy relationship with money. And that's, at a core identity level, then the people that have a healthy relationship believe and that they can manage their finances well. So that to me is the most important starting point around this, is what do we mean by our relationship with money?
Yeah.
So the second part to understand is the learning process. So how do we learn about money? What do we know about money? So Chris, when you were growing up, did anyone ever show you how to understand or manage money?
No. And I had really mixed messages from I don't want to turn this into a counselling session.
No.
I will happily openly share my story, because I think there's probably some learns in there. I learned about money when I started work, but when I think about my own money story, real mixed messages from both mum and dad.
Right.
Mum had an attitude in terms of money that she really, really struggled to hold on to it, and was really uncomfortable having those money conversations. Dad was probably a little bit better, but again, there was no open dialogue about it.
Right. So fundamentally, and no one ever showed you how to understand and manage it. Now, that's totally normal. Most people were never shown how to understand or manage money. None of my clients were. All the money coaches that I've trained, we have practice clients, none of them ever were, except for the clients whose parents, usually the dads, wanted to teach financial literacy lessons, and it ended up so painful the kids were scarred for life. But in general, right, no one ever shows you how to understand or manage money. So then later on in life, because it's not that easy, we end up in this situation where people go, well, it's money, right? And I'm an adult, and it's numbers, it's maths. Why can't I do this? So it's a very small step from why can't I do this to what's wrong with me? And that starts the shame cycle. So the first thing I always say to people is like, we shouldn't feel bad because you can't do something no one ever showed you how to do.
Sure.
So we start with that piece. But we don't start with a blank sheet of paper. This is what you alluded to. So it's not like we don't know anything about money. We just were never formally taught. Now, what we do know sits in our subconscious, because it is basically what you do know about money is based on the behavior that was modeled by the people around you as you grew up. Now, if you look at learning processes, we tend to think of learning as this kind of conscious cognitive process. You go to school and they give you a whole bunch of stuff and you try and memorize it or regurgitate it and everything. But infants learn from behavior because that's all they have, even before language. It's really, really important. And because infants are human,
model the behavior of people around them.
Right, absolutely. So what's important to understand about this is that as humans, we're born with no survival skills. Newborns can't even lift their heads for the first 3 months. Now, what that means is if I have no core survival skills, then I need to learn everything about the world. Now, what that means is that the learning process is a core survival mechanism. That means it's subconscious, it's automatic, it's deeply rooted. So what that means is I am absorbing everything that goes on around me, because that is how I learn how to understand the world, and that is how I learn to survive. So let's look at what's going on around. Do I control what I'm absorbing? No, I don't. I can't, right? It's just automatic. Do I control the environment? No, I don't. So, and then let's look at that environment around money. Yours was mixed, but no one talked about it. A lot of people grow up in environments of conflict, a lot, and because money issues are the biggest causes of divorce and suicide. So now what we do know about money that we go through life with is sitting at the subconscious level, but it's based on reactive behavior of people around us. And then when you add in the fact that, no one ever shows you how to understand or manage it, it's just challenging.
Yeah, I tell you what's interesting for me. So, and you look back and you go, what lessons did I learn from being in that environment? And it's that we don't talk about money, number one. And when we do, it's an angry conversation as opposed to a calm one. So they were the lessons that but I was fortunate enough to then be in an environment where I'm having conversations about money with other people, and a lot of self-reflection, a lot of work, and to get to a point where you go, well, actually, there's other ways of doing it, and how do I get there? But I think you raise a really important point that I want to explore, Dennis, because all of this is wrapped up in how we feel about ourselves, right? And the first thing, am I enough? How do I feel? Do you reckon that's the foundational element? And how do we, because that's a journey for all of us, right? So how do we get to a point where we're comfortable enough to then start thinking about the money elements?
Well, you're right. This is kind of the core of our relationship with everything. And so if I look at it from the money coaching perspective in terms of helping clients understand their relationship with money, we explain kind of the framework that I've kind of been through with you just now. And I need to add a few other things to it, which is kind of, your biology drives instant gratification and immediate response to danger. So it's totally understandable. Delayed gratification, leaving food lying around, for the future, just isn't part of our evolutionary heritage. There's a whole bunch of stuff that in some ways kind of learning to be good with money, saving and all that stuff is unnatural. So it has to be taught, it has to be modeled. So I think explaining to people how they got their money beliefs, and that wasn't a conscious process, is really helpful, because that you've got to start with an awareness of what's created your views of yourself, of money, and of money in yourself.
Yeah.
So how do I understand that? Well, I'll go back and we use something called a money biography, where people write down what they can remember, and I'll ask them, or I'll ask my clients, and we'll just explore basically, what messages did you get about yourself? So a message is what? Well, there's a set of behaviors that went on around you as you were growing up, and you've crafted that into a message about yourself. So let's take a fairly straightforward example. So Chris, I'd like you to go back to kind of 6-year-old Chris. It's not a therapy, by the way. And go, okay, remember when 6-year-old Chris wanted 50p for an ice cream, or maybe you wanted to buy, a sports magazine, or you wanted to buy an Airfix kit, or whatever it is, right? You're standing there, 6-year-old Chris is standing there with his hand out, asking mum or dad, or whichever one was more likely to say yes. And you're asking for something. You're asking for money for something that you'd like, right? Now, you're going to get a number of responses to that. But the first thing I want to ask you is, how does that feel?
Yeah.
Go back to 6-year-old Chris. How does it feel for 6-year-old Chris to be sticking his hand out and asking for something?
So at the time when I was 6, we didn't have much money. So a lot of the experience is one of I think the thought is the fact that I don't want to deprive mum and dad and
Wow.
put them under pressure by asking for that.
Right.
I think that's where my head goes with that one.
Okay.
And I remember when I was going back to the 80s now, there were periods in our family, and again, this was to do with the relationships my mum and dad had with money, periods of boom, but also periods where there was nothing for a long period of time. So I think it depends on when you'd ask me. If you'd asked me when times were good and it felt open, that would have been different. My head goes back to those times when money was short and I'd feel a pressure not to ask is the reality.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, because what I think you've done there is you've said, okay, well, I have a need or a wish, but I'm going to push that down because I know we don't have any money and I don't want to go there. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to cause problems, anything. So in fact, what you've got is you've got a message about money from the environment, a message about yourself, and the message you got is my needs. I'm just going to have to push them down for the moment because now's not the right time.
Here's the interesting thing, heading back to sort of some of the conversations we have with clients. I've got clients who have delayed and deferred gratification for decades, got to a point where they've built a level of wealth. And actually, we assume a poor relationship with money is about not having any. And in actual fact, sometimes, particularly with some of our clients, the reality is they've got stuff they want to do with their lives that they're not spending their money on. So it's interesting when we think about a good relationship with money, it's all about just building as much wealth as we can. But in reality, it's not, right? It's a balance.
Well, a good relationship with money is not the same as wealth building. You need a good relationship with money to build wealth. We're going to come back to this in a second. So we're going to circle around to this because what you've raised is a really interesting question around kind of where the extremes of behavior sit. So we tend to split things into, are you a spender or are you a saver? So in your experience, then, where do the extremes sit? They sit at either end, don't they? Extreme spending or extreme saving. So you just alluded to kind of extreme saving. The healthy bits in the middle, we don't have a word for that. So we don't talk about it, right? The closest I've come to it is unconflicted spending. But there's also some saving and there's some borrowing. There's a whole bunch of stuff sitting in the middle of, are you a spender or are you a saver? So unconflicted spending is where I can spend and I'm not worried about running out of money. I'm not worried about guilt. I'm not worried. It's unconflicted by.
Unconflicted is a good word for it.
So now you answered the question in a really interesting way. And again, thank you for that. Fundamentally, all of us at whatever age, whether it's young Chris, young Dennis, young whoever, when you've got your hand out, it's a position of vulnerability. It's a vulnerability because you don't know what the response is going to be. And it could be, no, don't be so spoiled, don't be so greedy. Or it could be, yes, of course you can. Or it could be anything in between. And maybe it's different on good days and different on bad days, which is kind of what you alluded to. And maybe it's different with one parent or another parent, or maybe, dad's in a good mood. Maybe, he's not in a good mood. So what you are is vulnerable and you're asking for something. So the response you get is going to contain a message for you about whether it's safe to ask and how important your needs are and how important you are. So if we go back to where does my understanding of self-worth and who I am come from? It comes from messages that you got, from behaviors that you created, messages around, and that created your belief system around. And so we explore that because it's not just about money. So if we go back to your clients who can't spend money, they're worried wealthy in the old age, and you look at it and go, well, I've done the cash flow modeling and you're going to never run out of money. The question there becomes, why are they not doing it? Why do they not give themselves permission to do it? Now, partly You could say, well, you know what, I've been conditioned to save for the last 50 years, and I've done that really, really well. You can't turn around, Chris, and say, oh, don't worry, you don't have a salary coming in anymore, but now you can start spending it. So at the very point I no longer have a regular paycheck coming in, you are asking me to flip round a lifetime's worth of saving and now go and run it down into an uncertain future.
But this is why I was talking about that relationship with money and our self-worth and everything being a gradual process as opposed to a flip a switch, because our emotions don't work that way, right?
Right.
So I had a really interesting conversation with a client last week. Been a client of mine for 15 years, Dennis, and she said to me, I've been encouraging her on a regular basis to say, look, if you wanted to, it's your money, it's your choice, but if you wanted to, you could really afford to spend more. So tell me a little bit about what would add more meaning to your life based on spending a bit more money, and how do we facilitate that? And about 3 years later, and this was at last week's review, she said, you know what, I've been factoring that in, and I think you're right. I think I do need to spend a bit more. And it's that big thing for me where our job as professionals and advisors often isn't to tell somebody what they want, it's to ask the right questions and help them come to a realization that in their own time they might want to consider it. But yeah, sure. It's a really interesting one.
So just to complete that, because there's many parts to this. One is changing hardwired behaviors. The second one, and there's more, but is, do I give myself permission to spend this? Oh no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't possibly do that. Right now, where does that belief come from? That belief comes from childhood, which is what is okay for me to have, what is okay for me to ask for, what is okay for me to spend. So that's back to money beliefs about what I can do or be or have with money.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't change just because you're in retirement, in the same way that your hardwired saving patterns don't change in retirement. And so you can go, well, I can plot it out, and from a cash flow perspective, you've got it. But what blocks people commonly around this is I can't give myself permission to do that. Partly there's a fear I might need it, but even when you go past that, you're like, no, so saving keeps me safe, and I can't give myself permission because in childhood it was important for me not to do that so I could avoid disappointment or just being told I'm spoiled or greedy, whatever it is. And so later on in life, it's difficult to give yourself permission to have the things that you've denied yourself for the whole of your life.
Sure. What's that journey, if it's right for you, what's that journey to giving yourself permission?
So that journey is about exploring your relationship with money. It's exploring those messages. It's exploring where they came from, and all behaviors have a purpose.
Yeah.
They all have a purpose. They all have a reason. Even procrastination, what is that? Well, that's actually trying to avoid the discomfort of change or looking at something I don't want to do. And essentially they're all usually fear-based, and they're trying to keep me safe. So self-denial tries to keep you safe if it's not safe to give yourself what you want. There's an expression in therapy around, a suit of armor that's like 5 sizes too small because it kept you safe as a kid.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't anymore. So explore those messages, and then when you realize that most of what you believe about yourself or about money and money yourself came from reactive behaviors from the environment you grew up in, from people who were just trying to do the best they could with what they had. But parenting is an imperfect process, and money triggers everybody. And then you go, okay, well, actually, that's just a story I made up for myself around what I interpreted the message to be about me and what I could have in an environment when I was young, with very little context. And I guess if I want to, I can change that now.
Yeah, it's having the self-awareness to understand that you can change some of these stories. It's really interesting.
Self-awareness and self-compassion. Self-compassion, Chris,
Yeah.
that's the key.
I a couple of years ago, and I'm not an expert, but because I hosted a podcast for many years with my daughter about kindness, where we talked to people doing good things in the world. I got asked to write a book about the people we'd interviewed, and when I was thinking about that, the way that I wanted to frame the book, I actually started after the introduction, and the reason the project had come to the fore for me and Charlotte was being kind to yourself, because actually I think self-compassion can then allow you and empower you to do so much more with your life, but also through being good to other people. I think it's self-compassion, such an important subject. Now, we mentioned about kids and grandkids and helping and empowering them to have better relationships with money. How do we do that?
Well, I've been doing parents talks for a while now on teaching children about money. So, and I gave one last week at a local school. And as I prepared for it, it struck me that actually, you know what? It's all about modeling behaviors. So I'll break it down for you in a little bit. But, fundamentally, people go, "Oh, you're a money coach. How do I teach my children about money?" And I go, "Well, you already are. The question is, what are you teaching them? And is it helpful?" So with that in mind, and we've talked about kind of early childhood experiences a few times, so I'm not going to go back into that. But basically, the messages I have for parents in the talk that I give is understand your own behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Understand the messages that you're potentially giving to children, and understand that if you're in a relationship with your partner, you need to give consistent positive messages about money, because whatever you do, they will pick up on. And that's really important. The other thing to understand about messaging is that you may be trying to give one lesson and they may be hearing something completely different. You may be trying to teach them about the value of money, and what they hear is, "I don't count, my needs aren't important." So particularly if you've got kids who've earned money or pocket money, gone out and done something, and they want to spend their own money, and you're saying, "No, you can't do that." So what does a child hear? It's like, "Well, it's not my money. I make bad decisions. I can't do it." Right now, you're trying to teach a financial literacy lesson. So I know this comes from a good place. I've just bought you a pair of shoes. You don't need to buy those sparkly trainers over there that you've had your eye on. They're a waste of money. But the child isn't getting a financial literacy lesson. The child is getting a message about themselves and what they can or cannot do with their own money. And that's profoundly disempowering. So understand behavior. It's really, really important.
I look at that, Dennis, and say, yes, like kids model, but they only model what they can see, right? So if I think about the relationship that, and I think I've got a fairly healthy relationship with money now, that's taken years to develop. I think what I probably don't do enough is communicate the actions that I'm taking to my kids. And it's that element where you go, well, look, they can only model what they can see. And even if you're doing good stuff, if you're not having more open conversations with your kids about money, they're not even seeing the behavior, right?
Well, so you raise an interesting point there, which is kids see you spending money, they never see you saving money. So if you want to teach children about saving money, you have to, and delayed gratification, you have to model it, and you have to show them how they do it. And the best way to teach children about financial literacy is to give them an allowance, because then they can learn important lessons about spending, saving, and taking responsibility for their actions. So they learn to start making their own financial decisions at an age in life where you can correct mistakes and it's never going to go, too wrong. Now, there's some caveats to this around, not judging them for the financial spending decisions and a whole bunch of other stuff. Don't criticize them. But that's the way to do it. So if we want to model the saving thing, you're going to say, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to give you £5 a week. Don't link it to chores. That's a separate issue. Don't link it to chores. £5 a week, because I'm not buying you sweets anymore. All right. Now, out of that £5 a week, you're going to save 20%. So how do I do that? Well, I give them 5 £1 coins. And then we go and build a piggy bank. This is depending on the age, right? When you start young enough, we're going to build a piggy bank, or we're going to have a savings pot or whatever, and we can talk about all the fun things that we can do with the money in that pot. So I'm going to give you 5 £1 coins, and then you're going to take one of them and put it in the pot. You have to show the process. It has to be possible. If you give them a £5 note, how can they save 20% of it? They can't. So then you give them the £5 coins. One goes in the savings pot. You label it, and you can call it fun pot or treat pot or whatever it is, but it's a special pot. Now, piggy banks don't pay interest, so you're going to have to reward the saving activity. And you can say, well, you know what? If you saved £10 or £20, whatever it is, I'm going to give you an extra pound, or I'm going to double it for you, whatever. So what behavior do you want to create? You model it and you reward it.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely.
Right. So later on, you start with your Go Henrys or your this or your that, and you reward it, and you model it, and you help them to manage it.
Yeah. And that's the good news, isn't it? Because when I was a kid, it was probably money in the pot. Now all of these structures can be done digitally, and it's that element of Go Henry, and there's others. There's other
others are available. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we use Starling. Starling's got a really good kids pot that allows you to segment. They call it spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a really good way of doing it. Here's the interesting thing, though, because I'm having loads of conversations with grandparents at the moment who are thinking about gifts and gifting money to both kids and grandkids. And one of their concerns, interestingly, and I've had a conversation with a couple of clients, is I don't want to spoil my adult kids or my grandkids who are still children.
Sure, of course you do.
How do you square that circle in your own mind when you're thinking about the messages you're sending to your kids when you're making gifts?
Well, it's not a one-off. It's a pattern of messaging that they get over time. Yeah. So when I do my parents' talk, I talk about kind of putting money into ISAs, for example. And then they go, well, what happens when they get to 18 and they can spend it all? I go, well, they can, but if you've modeled saving behavior correctly, then they wonon't, will they? So it's kind of up to you to control.
It's setting a culture, isn't it? It's setting a culture around money.
Right. Yeah. So I think you've had Will Rainey. So Will Rainey writes great stuff about kids. I think he told me once he doesn't give his godchild money. He puts £10 or £20 a month into his junior ISA, and he says, well, I think by the time the kid's 18, it'll be worth £8,000 or £10,000. Now, the thing with that is that it's a really good lesson on compounding and I don't know whether you want to call it dollar cost averaging or whatever else it is. So it's about delayed gratification. It's putting money out. So that is a way to model it for the child. Like, this is what I'm going to do for you, and look what it's created for you. Yes, you can take the £5,000 and blow it if you want, but I've given you, I've shown you how you can do this for yourself by doing it for you. Yeah. And this is a way to show you what kind of you can create later on in life, and you can use that. You can use that when in your own ISA, and if you're really worried about grandkids, you can just put it into the junior pension pot for them, and they can't touch it till they're 55. Yeah. Yeah. I think I don't have a firm view on either. I think you need to, if you're going to model long-term savings, that's a continuous process that starts at a younger age. But you do need to show them how to do it. And then you need to say, okay, now it's up to you to manage it. If you want to take your £5,000 out, why don't you leave 3 of it in there and give yourself a little treat? Why don't you take that? Or if you want, you know what, you're 18 or whatever, you want to take a year off or do whatever you want. Why don't you take some of that and use it for your year off? The process of delayed gratification, saving, putting money away has been, proved to you. Now you understand how that works, and you can do that for yourself going forward. So I think that's, it's a way of explaining to them. My kids all have ISAs, and they've had for a while, and they're like, yeah, great. Now they're all grown up. So like, show me how to manage it. Show me what you've invested it in. Why Vanguard and not this, or why and what the other. So
it continues, doesn't it? Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I'm modeling the behavior that I'd like them to continue, but I have to recognize that if they choose to do different things with it, that's also okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a spoiling. I think it just has to be. So just to interrupt you, just to finish this off, what you hear, what you're hearing, of course, about spoiling children and this and that and the other is your own fears or other people's fears around it. So I think, just to tie a bow on this one a little bit, is like, how do you communicate this stuff? So there's walk the walk, right, and talk the talk, which means don't shut down money conversations under any circumstances. So when a child comes to you and says, are we rich? Are we this? Or how do we say, whatever, have the conversation. And this is where most parents struggle. It's like, how do I answer that question? Because I was told you don't talk about money, or I have no idea what's going on. I don't know how to answer it, or, they're only young. And so, our own fears and anxieties around our relationship with money appear immediately when our children come to us and ask us to talk about them. And I say, talk the talk. Just step back a second and go, whatever the question is, just step back and go, wow, that's a really interesting question. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you asked that? Now you can use that in any conversation. You can use it with your clients. Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me a little bit more. You understand this as a basic coaching technique, but for children, it sends a really positive message about asking questions about money, because they're still forming their relationship with money. And if you go, oh, no, we don't talk about that, you've just shut down. You've just told them that money's not important, or they're not important, or there's something problematic here. And if you don't want to talk about it, where are your children going to go to get information from, Chris?
What's really interesting about that for me, Dennis, is I've always tried to encourage my kids to be curious, and I try to model that behaviour by being curious myself. I'm sort of regretting that now. My youngest is 13, because she's like a question judo player. She's great at questions, which doesn't always make my life easy, but certainly engaging in those conversations openly and just being transparent. And I suppose the other thing that was interesting for me is the point you made about kids making their own mistakes and not having a judgment over that. Because sometimes, if I look at my own life, some of the lessons that I've learned from a financial perspective have come from getting stuff wrong. Now,
of course,
you never want to get stuff wrong in a way that's going to really struggle. You're going to really struggle to recover from. But actually, that's making mistakes and learning from them, like anything in life, is often part of the journey, right?
It is the learning process. What goes wrong around money is that our own paranoias, our own anxieties around money overlay it. So if you have a child that you give them a bar of chocolate, they eat the whole thing, you're going to go, all right. But if you give them £5 and they spend the whole thing, you're like, oh no, lifelong spendthrift. Oh my God, it's going, it's like it's all going to go wrong. That's not true. Childhood behavior, whether it's chocolate or money or sweets or whatever it is childhood behavior. You as a parent can model, if you want your children to be good with money, model good money behaviors. And I'm not trying to make it so completely simplistic, but just understand and that it's yeah, what they do as kids. Most of the stuff we did as kids, we don't do anymore.
Yeah.
So they have to be given a chance to learn and not judged. All my kids have bought stuff. We know that one of them bought a shell suit that was a fire hazard, and that didn't even get. We didn't even put that back on eBay because that was too dangerous to resell. We've had 50 quid drones that never really flew; they just plummeted. So all of that stuff is a learning experience for all of them. And now they're all over Vinted, reselling stuff and buying stuff and everything. So they're really comfortable engaging with money, and that's part of the process.
Yeah, really interesting.
But you can't do that without giving them some money to try it out with. And
exactly.
and it's not free money. This is money that we would have spent on you. So chores is different. Chores is what you do as a family. Take the bins out, walk the dog, unstack the dishwasher, do the washing, whatever it is. That's chores. You don't get paid for family chores. If you link money to family chores, then money can end up as a tool of control. Because you didn't make your bed, so I'm not giving you money. Right. Well, that's money as a tool of control, isn't it? That's a punishment. I'm using money to punish you.
Because I was going to ask you about that. So when you look at chores, you never link that to money because that's just being part of the family, right?
Yeah. So financial literacy, teaching children how to, helping children to make money decisions or learn how to make money decisions is about an allowance. Not about paying them for chores. Now, if you have chores that you would pay people for, washing the car, doing the lawn, other stuff, then you should pay them for it, but not the family stuff.
Interesting.
I understand why people do it, because they go, well, I'm going to teach them about life, but actually, you know what? When you go into the real world, that is not how it works. In the real world, you're swapping your time, your money, and energy for this thing called money, so you can take that and buy stuff with it. At home, chores are a part of being the family. And so as adults, we also have to model chores, right? Don't complain when your wife asks you to take the bin out and go pull a long face, because how do you expect them to do it if you won't do it?
Well, no, I just send my wife an invoice. What? What?
Do you send her a calendar invite as well when you want to have a chat?
So much trouble for saying that, honestly. Tell me a little bit about, you've had this experience in financial services, you've become a money coach. What's been the biggest enhancement since 2018, since you've started learning about this stuff that you've had in your own life?
So the most powerful lessons I've learned are about how to connect with people, and more importantly, how to create safety and connection with the people I love the most. So my journey, my personal journey, has transformed the family life. I've learned to understand my reactivity, my anxiety, and I've learned how to manage it and understand it. And so in the words of Viktor Frankl, you create that space between stimulus and response.
Yeah, really interesting. What do you do now? So, we've talked a lot today, and I've really enjoyed it, about behaviour. How do you behave differently now when you look back?
How do we, or how do I?
What have you learned in that journey in terms of your behaviour changing, and what you would have done potentially before 2018 that you don't do anymore, or vice versa?
So I guess, in a broad sense, money coaching and understanding behavior has given me the tools and courage to explore where I am not whole and help others in that space. More empathy, less judgment, and the key is to partly to come back to believing that I am enough. So what I do now, or what I hope to do, is just be much more conscious around the messaging that I give people, and in the family environment, to understand that yes, every day there are good days and bad days, but fundamentally, if I can show up as the best version of myself and keep moving towards the best version of myself, then I can become the person I want to be. So yeah, I was angry, reactive for most of my life. I lived in scarcity. I lived in anxiety. And when I stop radiating that into the family environment, everyone can relax a bit. They can go, he's all right. He can, we can have a word with him. If I ask him for some money, he's not going to freak out or pull a face or do any of that stuff. And also, if we go back to kind of some of the coaching techniques that we use, it allows me to move towards them. So I can say, wow, that sounds really hard. Tell me a bit more about that. As the first line of inquiry.
Yeah.
And meet them where they are. And I think when you talk about relationships with your kids, meeting them where they are, which is something I never did for the whole of my life. I was always like 2 or 3 years behind where they were. I went, no, they've already moved on.
Yeah.
But now I think I meet them where they are. I hope I meet them where they are. And if you ask them, they'd say, wow, yeah, you know what, he's done a pretty good job around that. There's still more work to do. I think there's lifelong learning. Don't let other people define success for you. And don't let yourself get hijacked by your own anxiety or whatever it is, your reactivity. Understand it and try and create a space for yourself to choose the response. And engage with it.
To conclude, Dennis, I want to just explore the concept of a rich life. So a rich life, a healthy relationship with money. How would you define that from the perspective of the work you do?
Yeah, well, I have a friend who summed it up perfectly. He said, I've never had much money, he said, but I've always felt I'm rich in life. And I thought, I wish I had that. I'm not envious or jealous. I just loved what he said. To me, it was so powerful. It's a view of yourself and life that's just so empowering. It's so beautiful.
I think that it starts with gratitude.
Yeah.
I think that starts with realizing how lucky you are. Not in comparison, but like if you've got, it's really interesting. I'm really into the work of a lady called Esther Perel at the minute. She's
Esther, yes, the relationship queen.
And I really like her phrase, the quality of our lives is defined by the quality of our relationships. Now, I think there's a bit of nuance to that, and I think actually there's probably a sort of broader conversation to have. But if you just look at how lucky you are to have good people around you, and most of us have, what's a rich life for you? And when you're having conversations about a rich life with clients, where do you start?
Oh, great question. Well, I'm going to turn it slightly because I think in a rich life or success, I think, people say, what success mean to you? And so success for me is that I can live in harmony with my environment rather than in conflict with it.
Yeah.
So if I take that slightly and repurpose it a little bit around kind of, what does that mean, a rich life for clients? I think it's the same thing, where you help them to live in harmony with who they are and where they are, and that still allows them and you to create better outcomes and better futures for you. But you start in a position of safety and enoughness, that allows you to be open to the possibilities that are there in front of you, but are maybe blocked by fears, reactivity, and negative feelings about yourself or the world. So a rich life is where, in some senses, you are open to everything that life can offer you without self-loathing, self-doubt, self-limiting behaviors, and self-sabotage. And that comes back to self-compassion.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I suppose all of this comes back to, again, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world. How do we? And you wrote a really interesting blog the other day that I'd like you to share share your thoughts in the blog, because you talked about reframing problems as puzzles. Where does that idea come from? How is it useful, and how can it help us think about our relationship with money a little differently?
So thanks for bringing that up. I had a chance to revisit it today and went, wow, that's actually quite interesting. So the quote comes from Quincy Jones, and Quincy Jones, who passed away recently, but he was asked in his 80s, how do you deal with your problems? And he goes, I don't have problems, I have puzzles.
Interesting.
And I thought about that. And so what I wrote, and which kind of refreshed my memory, is like, well, when you look at a problem, if you look at the definition of a problem, like it's about something that's unwelcome or harmful or needs to be dealt with, or even kind of in the language of overcome, right? I need to overcome these problems. Whereas puzzles are games or toys or problems designed to test your ingenuity or knowledge. So when you look at it as a puzzle from a reframe perspective, you're connecting to much more positive language around what you're going to do and using your ingenuity to find a solution. When you look at it as a problem, you imply it's unwelcome or harmful and needs to be dealt with. And that takes you to a reactive space of judgment, like, why can't I do this? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
So it also views behavior as a conscious choice when often it isn't. So the puzzle reframe is curiosity and a desire for understanding.
Yeah, I don't use puzzle, but I might start. The reframe I always use is challenge. The challenges excite me. It's like, and it won't work for everybody, but for me, it's like, okay, challenge accepted. That's it.
Sure, absolutely.
But the principle actually is the same. The language we use in all of these areas can have a real massive impact into the way we perceive some of these elements of our lives,
or other people's lives.
Yeah, 100%.
Other people's lives, because you can, whatever you do with other people, you can flip back to yourself and vice versa. So, like, I wonder why they do that. And it's really curious. Like, what does that behavior get you? Is a much better way to approach something than, I don't know, and what's wrong with me. So puzzle, I think, tees that up for curiosity and self-compassion.
Yeah, what's really interesting as well, and I'm writing about this for the What Happens Next book at the minute, is you talked about the mistakes we make as kids. When we're at a transition point in our lives, I'm writing a lot about how some of the things we do as kids might be helpful in this period of change. And actually, that Quincy Jones quote's a really interesting one. Reframing this opportunity at a period of What Happens Next as an opportunity to play. And I know that play is often defined as quite a childish word. I think there's a real opportunity there to reframe this element of our lives, not as one of decline, but one of actual opportunity that we can live the lives we want.
Sure.
A bit more and enjoying it. So it's really interesting.
What comes up for me, just to say, around play is it's a period of life with curiosity and wonder.
Yeah.
And the education system beats that out of us. So I say, play is fantastic. When were we told that play wasn't appropriate, or you're too childish or whatever? All of that stuff, it's another set of messages. So give yourself permission, certainly if you're in that transition phase to retirement, to have, curiosity and excitement about what happens next. Now, obviously, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going along with validation and who am I and purpose and meaning and, what am I if I'm not X, Y, Z that I've been for all this period of time. And that brings a sense of insecurity and challenge around it. But it's also an opportunity to re-explore and just play with stuff.
Yeah. It's a great book. I don't know if you've read it. And I always talk about on What Happens Next because it's one of my favorites. A book called Design Your Life by Bill Burnett. And he talks about this concept of low-cost experimentation. So just trying stuff to see whether you're going to like it or not. And that to me is what play looks like in that period of our lives. Just try. My wife's come up to 50. And again, I'm going to get in trouble again for mentioning her age on the interview. But the interesting thing is she's just started a pottery class.
Awesome.
And just trying new stuff to make sure that we are, when we've got the opportunity, I think is really interesting. Dennis, I've loved today. Really enjoyed speaking to you. As we expected, it went off on a few tangents, which I loved.
Thank you, Chris.
And I think we've probably got enough for another conversation at some point. So we'll get that organised. Where can people find out a bit more about you and the work you do?
So you can find me at cambridgemoneycoaching.uk. Cambridge Money Coaching is all one word, cambridgemoneycoaching.uk. I'm on LinkedIn, Dennis Harhalakis, as well as Cambridge Money Coaching. And that should be enough for everyone to find me. I believe that I had a client who said, I found you through ChatGPT. I thought, well, great.
Yeah.
Something's
if AI knows about you, it's a good thing, isn't it?
But Cambridge Money Coaching would be the place to start. So thank you so much for your great questions and your time today, Chris and Norton.
I've loved it. Thanks, Dennis.